Hello, everyone, and thank you for attending our discussion on IAM and a large healthcare provider with SecureAuth. I am your host, Mindy Stubbs, Demand Generation Coordinator here at Optiv. Before we get started, a few items of housekeeping. First, this webinar is being recorded and will be available for on-demand viewing. You can see here on the console that we have several resources you can use during or following the webinar. This includes some resources we think you'll find valuable when it comes to your security program. We have our full speaker bios and social sharing buttons. You'll find all these same widgets on your toolbar as you scroll to the bottom of your screen. Now on to the webcast. I am excited to introduce our three speakers. Here with me today is Christine Mikolajczak, Jess Hickman, and Diego Mejia. Christine Mikolajczak is a Client Solutions Advisor in IAM for Optiv. Christine provides direction and guidance to some of the nation's largest and well-known organizations across the U.S. to strengthen their enterprise security through the use of identity practices such as access management, identity management, and access governance. Jess Hickman is the Director of Sales Engineering at SecureAuth, helping organizations prevent identity-related breaches through continuous assessments of risk and enablement of trust across identities. Jeff delivers flexible solutions and excels at breaking down complex technical challenges, meeting customer needs, and leading customers to success. Diego Mejia is the Director of Healthcare Practice for SecureAuth. Diego oversees the implementation of innovation systems that engage patients, improve the delivery of care process, and helps the industry digitally transform to meet the needs of the modern consumer. So with that, I will hand it over to Christine to get things kicked off.
Well, thank you, Mindy, for that great introduction. Before we get started, what I'd like to talk about is kind of put a frame around this discussion and really talk about how we've gotten into this conundrum where IAM is such a problem. It was like 21 years ago, as far back as 1997, I was a data center admin, and I was lucky enough to have 4 walls, no windows into that data center, and I could really see who was coming and going. I could see who was entering and even who forgot their little card key and tried to jimmy things open, maybe with a credit card, or maybe tried to get access through with somebody else's card. As time progressed, those 4 walls dissolved. I can't believe it, but it was 20 years ago when VMware came about. And believe it or not, even so, about 19 years ago, Salesforce started. So I started seeing things getting out of those 4 walls, things migrating to the cloud, employees actually working from home. We all had those giant bricks, and even those devices got smaller. And geez, our BlackBerries allowed us to respond to those emails really late at night. More applications got into the cloud, and geez, I think it was around 2002 when the bubble burst, and I had to start bringing in more folks from outside of my organization, more contractors, and more partners wanted to get access. We all had to do more with a lot less, and so more and more people needed to access to my environment. And even as I virtualized, more applications got out of my data center. So that data center really started to shrink more and more. And then we had a problem with privileged users. We all remember admin, and how great that was, and now what a problem that is. And even trying to track those permissions for those users. Something great came along in 2010. Actually, it was April of 2010 when the iPad was released. And that really caused much more disorganization around access. More people not only had a laptop, maybe a PC in their office that they barely went into, but they had tablets along with their mobile devices. So more and more people had more devices that needed to get more access. Again, really difficult to control. And now we've got these microservices. And that is becoming a new hot thing with our Kubernetes and our Docker networks or Docker platforms. So how do we really control all this? How do we secure all this? And this is really what has gotten us into the position that we're in today. And it just seemed it was a slow coming lava flow, if you will, and a lot of people are having trouble with different aspects of this, if not like the problem as a whole, and it can really be overwhelming. So why such a big deal? Well, along with all those great applications, we've got many username and passwords, and oftentimes those are pasted to the bottom of folks' keyboard or like written on a piece of paper, or even the last trick that I heard was maybe in their contacts. They actually have their username and passwords for all of those different applications. As I mentioned before, the attack surface has increased with the more applications, more devices, even people sharing credentials. Compliance also has really become to the forefront. We've got so many acronyms even in our compliance these days, and just because you're compliant doesn't mean that you're secure. Also, just access to corporate data and permissions around corporate data. That really is what we're trying to control. And with the sensitive corporate data, I mean, geez, it can be just downloaded onto a USB drive and maybe intentionally or not intentionally taken out of the network. We've spent a lot of money on firewalls and endpoint protection, but if we've done that and we've been doing such a great job at that, really, why has the number of breaches, why is it increasing? The Verizon data breach report actually has a steady incline of breaches reported. And, you know, I want to emphasize the word reported, because that oftentimes, like when they find out, they plug the hole, but I mean, what was the dwell time? How long were they in there? What were they doing? What data were they collecting? And even more so, what can those bad actors do with that data as it becomes exposed? I recently got some emails. This was as late as a couple months ago, and it came from a well-known breach, and they were trying to blackmail me for maybe going to some not-so-appropriate sites and saying that they were going to tell my friends and family that I've been going to these nefarious sites unless I paid them so many Bitcoin. So these are not only your users, your family, but this is something that we really need to focus on and really prevent. SecureAuth is on the line. We're going to be talking about that a little later on. But let's talk more also about what the IAM maturity actually looks like. So it's much more than just a certain use case and like maybe privileged access management, getting access to some sensitive data. That is an important piece, but there's an overall strategy. Oftentimes I'm brought in to my clients and customers, and we do talk about specific pieces of the IAM strategy, but overall we need to talk about what are you trying to do? What use cases are you trying to solve? What users, if they're internal, external, third party, customers, how do you want that experience to look like? And even more so, when we start taking a look at that experience, that should change for every one of those groups and the different types of applications. Or maybe they're in different directories, getting to different applications. That should be different for every one of those groups. And even so, if I'm a remote user, my experience should change if I'm, let's say, in a foreign country, or if I'm may be logging in from a different type of machine. That's absolutely something that should be looked at and considered when thinking about your workflow. But let's take a look at the IAM program and what the maturity actually looks like. When I do come in, I talk to my customers and we evaluate where on the maturity scale each of these pieces within the middle of the slide here, where they're at and where they'd like to go. Overall, I did mention a overall strategy and what that means, but everything starts out with your data and your identity data management. A lot of folks are going through different types of mergers and acquisitions, and there might be different titles that are associated maybe with the same type of job. That's a problem. And how do you give permissions to those folks in those cases? Moving on over to the upper right-hand corner, how are you handling user onboarding? How long is that user waiting to get access to that one application so they can start their job? Or even offboarding. I've heard unfortunate incidences of users still getting paid after they've left the organization. What part in the termination process does that happen, or even more so if it maybe is a disgruntled employee? How are you making sure that they don't have access to that sensitive data? And even more so, we talk about onboarding and offboarding, but what about those users that are in the moving stage? We call those movers. And in between, let's say, a job in marketing to a job in finance, or vice versa. How do you make sure that there isn't a situation such as a permission bloat? Folks that go from job to job within the same organization, after several years, they could really have permission to get to quite a bit of sensitive data, or even be able to not only request a change, but also approve that change. That just shouldn't happen. So that does need special care and feeding. Let's go on to the privileged access management. So that is elevated privileges for an account. And so we're talking about different things like vaulting and maybe session management, even to the point where you can get some recording done on that session. Let's say you have a third party that is logging in and doing some updates and you want to record them. Also, something that is becoming very popular here is the embedded applications, or in embedded applications, having credentials in there. And how do you remove that so a bad actor can't get their hands on those credentials and use those for nefarious things from there? And oftentimes we see access management standing in front of the privileged access management, kind of guarding the keys to the kingdom. Now, we are going to be talking about this at length later, but this is multi-factor authentication. And SecureAuth is a leader in adaptive authentication. Also along with this comes single sign-on. So that's a great benefit for your user as they log in and they're able to have a really nice portal into different applications. So they may be challenged if the workflow is deemed necessary, or maybe at the beginning of the day, they're challenged for a second factor. But maybe then later on, they keep on logging in, they're going about their daily activities, nothing suspicious is determined. So then they just log right in, they see their portal, and they're able to just click a button and go on into their different types of applications. So that's a huge benefit for your end users, but really it's how much make that a frictionless type of interaction. In the lower left-hand corner, we talk about access governance. So this is role-based access control. So this is the automated permissions of what you may have access to within an application or not access to. So you don't want everybody to be an admin in every application. Or maybe if I'm maybe if I'm a new user coming on in or put on a new project, I can go ahead and I can request permission, but then through the right checks and balances, somebody like Jeff or Diego can go ahead and make sure that I am really on that project and I should have those elevated permissions. Along with this, certification is absolutely paramount. So this is making sure that the right people should have these types of access. So this alone is just huge within organizations. This means that all the stakeholders need to get together around a table, talk about what roles should have what type of permissions, and if that is necessary, or what deems a workflow that you need to get approval to get elevated access. So this can be a touchy subject, but oftentimes it requires everybody from the organization to get around a table and talk about it. Last but not least, let's talk about data security and analytics. So this is like folder permissions to unstructured data. So this can also be like how many copies of this one document do I have around the organization, or even due to certain classifications of this data, who should have access to this? Honestly, should it be in this folder, or should it be in a different folder with elevated privileges to get access? So that also is a big undertaking, but it's also just to guard your sensitive data. So this is really what we talk about when Optiv does come in and talk to our clients and customers, and either we can, again, talk about this holistically or even take a deep dive into each of these pillars. What we're going to be focusing on today with SecureAuth is the access management. Again, I mentioned that they are a leader in adaptive authentication and have many different options for workflows for your users. So it can be something that they're challenged just when they need to, or if you're a remote user or a third-party user, you might get challenged more often. But I don't want to steal their thunder, so Diego, why don't you take it away?
Hey, Christine. Greatly appreciate that look into the IAM landscape and how things work. One of the areas that I wanted to point out where Christine was talking about is really around the consumer. And the reason we want to focus on that for the remainder of the webinar is because when we start talking about consumer, it gets a little bit more difficult. Because what actually happens there is a little bit of the rules change. It's what I call the difference between the W-2 and the customer. That is, when it's your employees, you can run them through all kinds of access management challenges that you want to. They are, after all, your employees. However, when it gets to the customer, you have to really focus on the experience. You can't be challenging the customer and making the customer go through too many egregious steps, or what's going to happen is your web portals, your mobile applications are not going to have any adoption. So what we want to focus on here the remainder of the time is on a use case for one of the larger healthcare payers on the West Coast for healthcare insurance. One of the initiatives that they've had is, as an organization, they felt that they want to drive their business more towards the use of digital technologies, those being a mobile app as well as a web portal. I think it's important to this healthcare payer to move in the direction of looking to refurbishing their web portal. Typically right now in healthcare, what we're under is a digital transformation. We have a movement where a lot of healthcare providers are trying to figure out how they can leverage things like IoT, things like a mobile app, things like some of the things, wearables, as well as these next generation technologies to be able to improve the way that a patient sees their healthcare provider. And what we've often been discussing with a lot of our customers is actually this. and that is improving that patient participation. Nobody enjoys going to the doctor. It's not a fun experience. From the moment you hit the door to all the forms that you have to fill out, talking to nurses, going through even the triage component before you actually even see a physician. Everybody understands that from the healthcare provider side. So what a lot of measures are trying to do is really remove those barriers and remove that experience and make it softer for an individual. Make it better for a patient to be able to set their own appointments, perhaps even look at their own medical records. I know I recently went to a checkup. I'm using one of these healthcare providers that is actually under the next generation technology. I was able to take a blood test, and within 20 minutes on my mobile app, I had my results. It showed everything that was going on with my cholesterol. It showed everything of what was going on with my health right there on that mobile app, a mere 20 minutes after I had actually taken the test. That kind of technology is happening on the healthcare provider side, so of course the payers have to keep up. And it is under this pressure that this healthcare payer was looking to refurbish. It's one of the main challenges, of course, you run into when you're going to open yourself up to placing personal health information inside a web portal or inside a mobile app is that now it does become a practice of security. You have to go ahead over the challenge and overcome the challenge of now how are you going to secure that patient data that's going to reside behind those portals and those mobile apps. Traditionally, what you normally see is you see kind of this tug of war between security teams and lines of business, the web app teams, that are really distrusting, if we will, of one another. The best way that this healthcare payer and that we found with some of our other customers to do is to not treat security so much as a naysayer, if you will, but more to the point of an enabler of business. If we can figure out how to make security become more of a business tool, then we can actually help convince a lot of the app owners and the business owners of being able to deploy top-shelf security. And that's what we were able to accomplish at this healthcare payer. When this payer made the decision that they wanted to refurbish their web portal and wanted to add their mobile app, they ran into something that everybody runs into. So each time an organization wants to increase and drive business towards that digital space, is they're going to run into these natural barriers. And we can go through them here real quick on what they actually are. So one of the main barriers for them was infrastructure. They actually had a web portal. It just wasn't very good. It had very low adoption, and it was clunky. It was difficult to manage. As they spun up their new web portal, they realized they couldn't quite get rid of their old one right away. Still, many of their users were going to be on the old one. So we had to figure out ways of how you can have your new portal, your next generation apps, actually work with the infrastructure you have in place now. So that's often a barrier that a lot of people don't realize once they make that move into a digital technology. The next one, of course, was security. Their portal, their old portal, had zero authentication security around it. There was no strong confidence that the user who was logging in was the one that was supposed to log in. Also, that lack of perceptible security was also a deterrent. It affected the next factor, which is an adoption rate. So not only was the portal clunky to use, it required you to log in multiple times, but because there was no security, a lot of the user base, a lot of the customers were complaining that they wouldn't go to the portal because it didn't appear that it was secure enough for them to protect their data. The next natural barrier, of course, is compliance. Even though you may have created a nice, beautiful portal, even though you may have created a fantastic mobile app, how does that meet the compliance that you've already established on your internal IAM programs? The RBACs that Christine talked about, those, how are you going to enforce and apply those on your next generation mobile app? Right? So these are some of the things that need to be considered. And then lastly, of course, is the identity. How do you make sure you're matching the entitlements to that proper identity? In the specific use case of this healthcare payer, it's actually quite unique because as an employee, they were accessing a lot of resources, but since they were also employees, they were also customers. Since, if you work for a healthcare payer and you have a health plan, well, of course, you're going to be covered by that health payer. That's your health plan that's offered by the company. So oftentimes we had to realize that a user could be coming in as an employee with different access rights, or could be coming in as an actual customer with different access rights. So these were some of the challenges that this payer had to figure out, and were kind of waiting and trying to struggle through until SecureAuth and Optiv showed up to discuss how we would overcome those barriers. And here ultimately is what was deployed. We deployed federation. So one of the things that was important was that when we're talking about a web portal, it's usually not one. It's a series of web portals. In this case, there were 4 different web portals. So the prior experience for the customer was that they would log into one portal, and then they needed to go, for example, take a look at a claim, and then from there you want to pay a claim, so then you have to go onto a separate web page entirely. And you'd have to once again log in, or even in many cases, log in with an entirely separate set of credentials. So we removed that barrier by providing single sign-on across those various portals. The next thing we did is provided self-service. Self-service is a marquee component in any web portal. When we talk about web service, we're talking about being able to reset your own password. Self-service password reset is a very strong benefit both for the customer as well as for the organization. In the case of the organization, we were able to reduce a lot of help desk calls, which of course created a lot of natural cost savings. But also for the end user, their ability to not have to worry about calling a help desk to change their password immediately began to give them the experience and the control over their medical records that they wanted. Right? The other component about self-service is that ability to register. So if I am a brand new user and I make the decision that, okay, I am a customer of this healthcare payer, I'm going to go ahead and use their web portal, how intuitive is it? Can somebody like my 64-year-old mom, who's quite computer illiterate, use it? And so the intuitive flows of actually creating your user account, being able to verify that you are the actual user and going through those steps, there's quite a bit there that needs to be uncovered and packaged well enough in a way that the user can consume real simply. If you're able to achieve that, then you're able to go to, of course, high levels of adoption. To give the customers the sense of security that they were after, we were able to provide adaptive strong authentication. This is the next type of authentication that you must have. I think quite a number of people are pretty accustomed to either using a Google Authenticator or one of these one-time two-factor experiences. The type of authentication that needs to exist on a web portal is more of an intelligent-based, of a context-based, of a risk-based type of authentication where we're taking measurements and metrics about the context of that access request. So in terms of who is the user, from where is this user accessing, have they previously used this device to access? Is there any sort of anomalous behavior of the user? Is this the 15th time they log in before 7 a.m.? And that is atypical behavior from what they normally do. So these are the types of calculations of risk that our product was able to do and deliver for this particular customer to then reduce the friction on the end user. Because after all, what we're looking to do is, if it really is you, then there should be no barriers between you and your data. How well do we determine if you are that actual user? If we can do it in, as I like to call, invisible ways, then we've really created a nice digital experience for that end user. Next, of course, was the integration with the current environment. We were able to connect the new portal with the current portal that's in place and create a federation environment where some users can actually start at the old portal and move over to the old portal. Some users can go and stay on the old portal only, and some users go over to the new portal. That was exactly the experience that this customer was looking for, because no one ever starts with a new application as a big bang. There's always a migration period. the best way to create a migration period is to be able to run both portals in a parallel manner, allowing users to shift over from one to the other. And then lastly, of course, was the user repository. One of the marquee things that a lot of organizations want to do is they want to pass off risk, particularly a healthcare payer. Wherever they see risk to them as an organization, they want to go ahead and diffuse that out somewhere else. So what they were able to do with us is we're going to host their identities. It is hosted in our SaaS offering. The way that this payer looked at it was the liability would shift with SecureAuth, and they wouldn't have to worry about customer identities. They already have, of course, a lot of liability and a lot of worry and security around their employees and perhaps even their business partners and those identities. However, for consumers, they didn't want to take on that liability, and they were able to shift that over into the user repository where SecureAuth is hosting those identities for them. Those were the elements that were deployed, and those are the ones that naturally allowed them to overcome those barriers that they ran into. As soon as we were able to perform this, then quite simply, the way this was presented back into the board and into the C-levels was, we have the solution that's going to actually reduce the barriers to our digital transformation. So I'm going to go ahead and, so for the next part of our webinar, what I want to do is hand it over to Jeff Hickman, who's going to run us through a demo of everything we just discussed on the use case. Jeff.
As Diego mentioned, it's extremely important to focus on the user experience when dealing with consumer authentication. It's something that we always try to address even for employees, not just consumers, because we feel that that user experience helps adoption for all user types, whether it's partners, vendors, employees, consumers, whatever they are. But it is extremely important because if a user can't log into your portal to access your services, there's plenty of other places that they can go to do business with. So we always try to push for an easy-to-use, a simple user experience. You also have to think about the demographics of your user base. You have to understand that you have some users who may be very familiar with technology. They may be on Snapchat all day long. They know how to get text messages. They are familiar with email. Heck, they've done a lot of two-factor at other places before. And then you have other members of your population who access your web app that may not be that familiar with technology. Maybe they still use rotary phones. Maybe they don't have an email account. It does happen, so we want to try to have as many options and as many ways to verify our users as possible while still keeping that security level really high. So here I'm going to log into a web portal mockup that we have. I'm going to enter my credentials. And what we're going to see happen here is that I'm going to be challenged for multi-factor authentication the first time that I log in. Now, I've never logged into this before from this device or from this geolocation. We're analyzing all that information under the hood, and that's what's making the decision to present me with this multi-factor authentication screen. I have a number of options, as you can see on the screen, from getting a text message with a login link to getting an email that contains a one-time passcode, or even a voice call that has a passcode in it. We also have integrations with our mobile app to send a push notification, ways to contact a help desk or call center to provide verification, a number of different ways to allow users to verify their identity and that their credentials are valid for them accessing this. For the sake of this demonstration here, I'm going to select to get a login link to my cell phone via text message. This is actually a pretty neat feature. What it allows us to do is send a text message with a hyperlink in it, and it acts a lot like push to accept, which you might be familiar with when accessing your websites through other MFA or two-factor providers. The difference here is that it doesn't require a specific application. It actually allows the user to just get a text message and click on that link and provide their authentication. You can also see that we could do a simple one-time passcode, which is a slightly different user experience, where the user would actually be prompted here to enter a PIN rather than to just select a link and say that they've accepted access. So this flexibility, allowing your users to have multiple different ways that they can access the system, whether it be via email or phone or even calling into a call center, makes it very simple and straightforward for your users to gain access to your web portal. One of the what, in my opinion, one of the nicest features about this, about the SecureAuth system is when a user logs in and they go through all this hassle the first time, right? Which, maybe for us it doesn't seem like a whole lot of hassle, right? We've gone through the authentication process, we've gotten to a landing page here. It's really not that big of a deal, but for your users, they don't want to be hassled with this every single time they log in. So what we can do is we use that same context, that last session that user logged in with, the device they came from, or maybe even the geolocation, or even their behavior, understanding when they typically log in, what platforms they typically access. When we have all that context, we can then, the next time the user logs in, we don't have to prompt them for second factor. We don't have to get in front of them or put any barriers in their access attempt. If I can enter the correct password here, we'll see that I move forward straight through to the landing page here. Now, you may be asking, okay, that seems really simple, really straightforward. What happens in the case of a bad actor? What happens if someone is coming in that's attempting to do account takeover? Well, if you see here, I have actually my Tor browser up. And when I first landed on this login page here, I was actually presented with a message that says, hey, we've detected suspicious activity with your login attempt. Please contact support. And we can see coming through the Tor browser, I'm actually coming out of the United States, but our system understands that this is a way to anonymize the traffic. And so we can actually detect that information. We can block that, stop users from coming in, and we can make the process for legitimate users simple and easy while keeping those bad guys tightly on the outside. And with that, I'll hand it back over to Christina and Diego, and we'll answer some of your questions.
And for this next portion, we're going to step through some commonly asked questions and get the panel's experience. So, Diego, I'm going to pass this one to you, but how have you seen portal projects be successful?
Thanks, Christine. I was reading through the question. As it applies to this health payer use case, and the irony is that we see this among several customers, but when talking with this payer, one of the things that was mentioned that as the web team undertook this project and began moving forward with it, they didn't realize there were other challenges working internally with the other teams inside the organization. One of those was, of course, bridging the gap with security. As quite often is normal, you'll have lines of business, you'll have web leaders, web app owners that want to deploy their app, get it out to the population. However, it's got to be screened and checked by security. So it ended up being kind of a contentious situation that began to evolve. And at a certain point, we were at a standstill. But with the help of Optiv and SecureAuth and the types of solutions that we were able to put in place, we actually overcame those objections. Quite normally, like the same barriers that you saw earlier about adoption and security, this is how we were able to overcome the internal barriers just working with inside the organization. Everybody's policies were preserved, everybody's needs and initiatives were preserved, and the project was able to continue on. So it's actually something that a lot of people don't expect, but it does happen.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that, Diego. This really can be a rough road, depending on who is involved, or even more so, who's not involved. So where I've seen these types of projects have been successful is if a good cross-section of all the teams affected, and that can be teams that don't particularly like one another, or maybe have different ideas of ownership. Maybe I'm downplaying that too much, but really it can be a lively discussion, to say the least. Another question we often get is about protecting the portal. Jeff, can you take this?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a great concern. There are a lot of avenues that bad actors can take to compromise not just your own internal systems, but also individual accounts. A lot of times we don't always get the full scope of what the threat is We've heard the statistics around, brand recognition and losing that kind of share of voice because you've been breached or you've been in a headline for it, but also the individual pain that goes along with identity theft for your actual consumers. And things like with a payer in this specific case, there's situations where they're not just accessing the payer's portal, but it's also other services that are attached to it. Things that might be associated with like a health savings account fund or something along those lines where a bad actor can get through and access, actual monetary resource rather than just PII. So there's a lot of concerns around, protecting the portal. But typically, most businesses, what happens is that when you start raising that level of security, it gets to a point where the usability has decreased so much that there's really no even balance to find. So it's really kind of a tightrope walk, if you will, between what the business needs and how you're able to successfully move your customers forward, as well as protecting against those threats. The particular threats were account takeover, kind of brute force credential stuffing to get in. Also, a lot of scraping, like web scraping from bots happened, where they were looking for prices of plans and other pricing information that's behind a login wall so that they could put them on sites that would offer them for lower rates or for comparison and stuff. So there was actually quite a wide range of actual threats that they were trying to protect against in this specific use case. And I really think that is the same across every consumer portal. There's always going to be a very wide range of threats that you have to protect against, which is why we're such strong proponents of a holistic defense, to fall back on an old, favorite as a layered defense, right, of having multiple things in the way to prevent those bad actors from getting in.
So in defining requirements for protecting the portal, I'll take this one. This is absolutely the pre-work that needs to happen. And again, thinking about the success that goes into a project of some sort. And also not only thinking about what you want that user workflow to be, but also perhaps maybe even data that you want to get along the way and what you want to do with that data. But really what it comes down to is that user experience. Now, we talked a little bit before about the different stakeholders around the table that need to have their say. For especially user portals or consumer portals, marketing is absolutely going to have a say on who's going to have what type of experience, and then about that data collecting along the way. So if a user is let's say, creating an account and there's some kind of weird disruption along the way, they're not going to use it. Or even worse, if they do get stuck, they may actually call the help desk, and there might be a lot of unnecessary calls into the help desk. And I mean, that's the last thing that anybody wants, is to implement a new system, but also create a problem for those poor help desk folks. So our last question is around synthetic account fraud. Jeff, why don't you give your comments on this?
Yeah, this is actually a really big topic. It's something that we've been seeing more and more of in the past, I would say, year to 2 years, really kind of the best way, if you will, and I hate to use that term best whenever we're talking about fraud or an attack, but really kind of the more sophisticated way that an attacker would go after what's typically referred to as like account takeover. Basically what this is the combining of made-up or fictitious details as well as true stolen details about a user to either compromise an existing account or even to pre-register an account. So in healthcare, especially in the payer side, what can happen is that your company that you work for, which is offering you a healthcare plan, sends your information to the healthcare payer. They create an account in their system on the back end, and it doesn't create a portal or a application login or credential set until you go and register. And then it links the two together, and now you have access to your insurance plan. The danger in that, and the danger of leaving that open, is that a bad guy can get in there and use some of their fraudulent information and register as you. So if you think about it, if I'm a bad actor and I know that I'd stolen through another nefarious activity, or I had bought a list off the dark web that showed me a bunch of accounts and credentials that maybe have been created in this payer system through a compromised third party, I could then go try to register accounts against those, betting on human nature, betting on the fact that not everyone goes and sets up their insurance portal right away because they're not sick. They don't need to get in there and do anything. They have the mobile app maybe, or they have other pieces that they're using to leverage for it. So I can go after and start making that attack. And if the registration process doesn't have security around it, if it's maybe a magic link in an email that they click on that's supposed to be one-time use, or if it's maybe it's controlled through a PIN that was emailed to them or sent even by mail, we've all seen those compromises happen before. And so what happens is that the bad actor now can go and register, use the self-service registration tool, put in your member ID, put in their cloned or maliciously assigned a number that they have from like a VoIP service out of Singapore or something, and now they are you in the payer's eyes, and they're logging in, but they're using all fraudulent data, all synthetic data, which is where that term comes from. So for things like registration, password, self-service, or even account updates, it's really important to put that same level of protection you're putting in front of the front door around these specific features. It also helps with the user experience, because if you have a user who's registered from the same device, the same geolocation, has some behavior patterns that we can track, logs in from the same thing, when they go to update their phone number because maybe they made a typo or change their email address because they want to use a new one that's not their business one, maybe you don't have to prompt them again because we already have that wealth of data about them. So there's a lot of concerns around this. It is probably the most sophisticated avenue for fraud, but we're also seeing a whole lot more of it than we used to, than just plain fraudulent account takeover. It's kind of the best of breed of both worlds.
Wow, thanks, Jeff. Well, one thing that I hope that we really highlighted was the partnership between Optiv and SecureAuth. And what is really important, what we bring as a team to our customers is our combined knowledge, not only in use cases like this, but also other use cases. I know that we'd love to answer many more questions that you have. Please invite us in. And Mindy, back to you.
Awesome. Thank you. That was such an informative presentation, and I really enjoyed the panel discussion around those common questions. So I want to thank our awesome speakers, Christine, Jeff, and Diego, and all of you for attending. We really hope you enjoyed this presentation. A follow-up email will be sent to you shortly that will include a link to review today's webinar recording and the additional resources. Thank you all so much, and have a great day.